When the big book was written in 1938, early 39, there were only as many people in all of Alcoholics Anonymous as there are here tonight. And sometimes, you know, when we come in, we think, boy, this thing it's already grown up, it's already there, it's probably been here forever. It's amazing, isn't it? 65 years ago, there was no hope for any of us. We were dead ducks. There was no AA. There was no recovery. The human solution was just as powerless to help us then as it is now. There were a few people probably getting recovery because they had some kind of a spontaneous psychic change that the doctor talked about. But other than that, we were doomed. We were headed for jails, institutions, the crazy house, and death, because we were afflicted with a deadly, incurable, progressive illness. And then all of a sudden, something began to happen. And by the time 1938 rolled around, it was in full bloom. It didn't look like much yet. It was kind of a paltry little garden. A few people in New York, a few people in Cleveland, a few people in Akron. And they were struggling along, and every once in a while somebody would show up. In fact, there were a lot of people who kind of came through those meetings, and they heard the story, heard the message, and then went on their way. Nobody knows how many of them actually carried the message on. But of course, by the time 1938 came around, it was pretty obvious that this fellowship and the 12 steps, which by that time they had developed, not in writing, but by word of mouth, that these steps worked and that people were getting sober. People who had been given up were lost. Chronic alcoholics who were going to die of their disease because nobody could help them. And when we walk in these doors, we need to remember where all of this came from. We have a heritage, given that it is a short time, substantially less time than I've been alive. And yet, what a rich heritage it is. Think about this for a second. 65 years ago, there were 2. 62 years ago, there were maybe 100. Today, there are about 5 million of us all over the world, in almost every country. And our big book has been translated into 25 or 26 foreign languages, including, I understand they're working on a Mayan translation right now. And this is a miracle that has occurred. There's something I'd like to impress on you as it's been impressed on me. In the 36 and a half years I've been around here, it becomes more and more and more obvious that this is true. These 12 steps work. And but for the fact that the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous work, we wouldn't be here. There would be no fellowship. The proof of the pudding is simple. The people who work the steps recover, and those who do not seldom recover. And so as we go through the steps together, we're going to be looking at one of the most amazing revelations, one of the most amazing things happened to the human race, because it has reached out and affected the lives of so many millions and is growing exponentially. The 12 steps may be the last great hope of the world. We're not dealing here with some kind of a nice philosophical little thing that a bunch of guys sat around and dreamed up. We're not dealing here with some treatise that was produced by someone who was a candidate for a PhD. We're not dealing here with the works of an academic. We're not dealing here with the works of an ecclesiastic or a medical guy. We're dealing here with the works of a bunch of ordinary people. The one who did the majority of the writing being a stockbroker who had basically been cashiered out of his business. These were the dregs of the earth. These were the people who everybody scorned. Many of these were people who had been given up as dead by the various hospitals and other organizations trying to help them. And yet, from that beginning, we have something of inestimable, priceless value. I want to read something to you. And we'll keep this in mind as we study these steps together. God, in His wisdom, has selected this group of men to be the purveyors of His goodness. In selecting them through whom to bring this phenomenon, He went not to the proud, the mighty, the famous, or the brilliant. He went to the humble, to the sick, to the unfortunate. He went right to the drunkard, the so-called weakling of the world. Well might He have said to us, unto your weak and feeble hands I have entrusted a power beyond estimate. To you has been given that which has been denied to the most learned of your fellows. Not to scientists or statesmen, not to wives or mothers, not even to my priest or minister have I given this gift of healing other alcoholics, which I entrust to you. It must be used unselfishly. It carries with it grave responsibility. No day can be too long. No demand upon your time can be too urgent. No case too pitiable. No task too hard. No effort too great. It must be used with tolerance, for I have restricted its application to no race, no creed, and no denomination. Personal criticism you must expect. Lack of appreciation will be common. Ridicule will be your lot. Your motives will be misjudged. Success will not always attend your efforts in your work with other alcoholics. You must be prepared for adversity, for what men call adversity is a ladder you must use to ascend the rungs towards spiritual perfection. And remember, in the exercise of this power, I shall not exact of you beyond your capabilities. You are not selected because of exceptional talents, and be careful always if success attends your efforts, not to ascribe to personal superiority that which you can lay claim only by virtue of my gift. If I'd wanted learned men to accomplish this mission, the power would have been entrusted to the physicians and the scientists. If I'd wanted eloquent men, there would have been many anxious for the assignment, for talk is the easiest use of all talents with which I have endowed mankind. If I'd wanted scholarly men, the world is filled with better qualified men than you who would have been available. You were selected because you have been the outcast of the world, and your long experience as drunkards has made or should make you humbly alert to the cries of distress that come from the lonely hearts of alcoholics everywhere. Keep in mind the admission you made on the day of your entrance into AA, namely, that you are powerless, and that it was only your willingness to turn your life and will into God's keeping that relief came to you. And that's us. Starting on page 48, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. There are those who say that the word rarely ought to be never. There is a story going around that Bill agreed to that this was the only word in the big book he would want to change. And we're going to go to page 181. 181. The last full paragraph. If you think you are an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of intellectual pride, I love that phrase, which keeps you from accepting what is in this book, I feel sorry for you. If you still think you're strong enough to beat the game alone, that's your affair. But if you really and truly want to quit drinking liquor for good and all, and sincerely feel that you must have some help, we know that we have an answer for you. It never fails. If you go about it with one half the zeal you've been in the habit of showing when you were getting another drink. Why is that? Because your Heavenly Father will never let you down. And so it seems quite clear that insofar as the people who got all of this started, the people who wrote this book, the people whose absolute dedication and the sacrifice of their whole lives to the foundation of this fellowship, they believed, and they're telling us they believe, that this never fails. When I have somebody new to work with, which is fairly often, I look them in the eye and I tell them this: if you do exactly what I tell you to do, if you don't drag your feet or make excuses, and I promise if you'll do that, I promise you I'll show you every step of the way exactly what you're doing and why. If you'll do that, I promise you that you're going to be just fine. And I know that that's true because I've been doing this for a long, long time. I came in 1964 and I've taken well over 2,000 people through the steps. I'm completely convinced, without any shadow of a doubt, that these steps, this program, never fails if we just go about it with even half the energy and the time and the intentions that we went about getting our next drink. And believe me when I tell you this is absolutely as true for those who are addicted to drugs, or those who are addicted to food or gambling or anything else. Because these 12 steps are spiritual principles which never fail us, and they solve our problems. Thoroughly followed our path. Notice again the use of the words. What is the path? The path is laid out in this book. They're saying this never fails if you thoroughly follow our path, what we did. We're saying to you, we know this will work for you. And they're right. This was the truth. Well, how about those who don't make it? Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. What don't we understand about the word completely? This is complete surrender. There doesn't seem to be any point in making a half surrender. I don't even know that that's possible to do that. I can't visualize what surrender, partial surrender would be, unless of course we were willing to give up, let's say, everything but our sex lives, for example. And I suppose there are people who have that problem. But going on, who are these people who will not completely give themselves to this program? Usually, men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. The constitutionally is a term which is used here to mean people who can't help themselves. It's they're so set up in their psyche and in their minds that they are unable to be honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Now, people have taken that rigorous honesty out of context, as if that's talking about don't dip your hand into the till, and every time you see your neighbor doing something wrong, get rigorously honest with them and tell them off. Make sure you get right in their face and make sure that they know what they have to do to reform their actions. Be rigorously honest with them, even if they didn't give you permission to do that. But those that feel good, because if they're wrong, we have to be right, don't we? Every time I make you wrong, I'm wrong. Every time I make you wrong, I'm wrong. Think about what I'm about here. I'm making myself right. This is a program of honesty with ourselves. That's the sine qua non. That's the bottom line of recovery. Look at this paragraph every time it's read and see and hear what it's saying to us. We don't recover if we're not willing or able to be honest with ourselves. Why? Because look at the fourth step. What are we going to have to do when we write that fourth step? What are we going to have to do when we take our fifth step? We've got to get down deep and dirty with everything about ourselves. What does it tell us when we take the fifth step? We swallow our pride and we go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Notice there's nothing in there about all our good stuff. That's a new invention of New Age AA. It's got nothing to do with the fifth step. The fifth step is designed for us to articulate what the heck is wrong with us so we can get rid of it with God's help. The good stuff about us isn't killing us. It's the bad stuff that's killing us. Their chances are less than average. Now how about our friends who come here diagnosed with all kinds of dread psychological and diseases and symptoms and whatevers that have been loaded up with whole cocktails of that you can line up the pills here about like soldiers in line. What about those folks? They have any chance? There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Let's take a look here. There's something really neat about this. Take a look over on page 64 just for a second. You see, the big book is always consistent, isn't it? It's never inconsistent. You find a statement on page 40, you'll find the same statement on page 60 and page 80 and page 180. It'll be the same statement. Never varies. Bottom of page 64. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. Here's the rule. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Our stories disclose, in a general way, what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. Let's take this at its face value. Face value is that right here in the 5th chapter on page 58, the reader is referred to the stories. That means, of course, not just Bill's story and Fred and Jim, and to some extent Roland Hazard. It really refers to stories in the back of the book. Why? Because this book was written as an entirety. It was not written to be expurgated or readers digested by sponsors. When we ask our new people to read the book, we mean the whole book. When we look in chapter 7, we get there a little bit later, we're going to find that the direction that we follow in working with somebody new is to give them the book and ask them to read the book. And after they have read the book, we ask them then if they wish to work the steps. And if they do, we take them immediately to the steps. And now that we're being told, in effect, look at these stories. They tell you in a general way what we used to be like, what happened and what we're like now. Why? Why did they do that? Why did they put their stories in here? Wasn't Bill's story and Jim's and Fred's story enough? The story of the jaywalker, wasn't that enough to convince people that they ought to do something about their alcoholism? Obviously they felt not. What did they feel and why did they put those stories back there? Because they knew that with the 39 stories, somewhere in those 39 stories, the new person is going to find themselves. They're going to find themselves. They're going to be able to say, yes, I'm one too. I recognize that person. That's me. And looky here. The person who wrote this story is saying, here's what happened to me. Here's how I drank. Here's what alcohol did to me. Here's how I tried to get sober and couldn't. Here was my desperation. Here was my overwhelming fear. Here was my anger and my resentment and my thoughts of revenge. Here was my running away. These are my geographics. These are the things I did. This is the family I lost. This is the job I lost. This is my life that I nearly lost. These are the hospitals I went into. These are the treatment centers. These are the psychiatrists and priests and ministers that tried to help me, and nothing helped. What did I do? I started working 12 steps of recovery, and here's how I did it. And they tell us precisely how they have recovered, and they stress the spiritual freely. You won't find anything back in the back of the book that's pussyfooting around about God. Now, don't say anything about God, he might run out. Well, how are you going to explain how you recovered if you leave out a higher power? Did you do it on your own? Well, good for you. Then you didn't need to be here in the first place. There are plenty of people who don't need to be here. We're glad they're here. They want to stop drinking. That's the only requirement. There are many people who come into these rooms who can stop or modify on their own given sufficient reason to do so. They don't need the 12 steps. They don't even need God to do that. They need God if they want to have the kind of life that we get to have, and that's why they're here. They don't know it. God got them in here because He has a purpose for them too. And then they tell us in the stories in the back of the book not only how they recovered, but how it's like now. What does that do? Okay, it's simple. The stories do two basic things. They help to break down the walls of denial. Alcoholism is a disease of denial. Our minds tell us there's nothing wrong with us. Our minds do not want to admit the truth because that would mean that they would be then deprived. We would be deprived of our alcohol fix. And so we deny the truth. It breaks down the walls of denial. And the other thing that these stories do is to help us to have hope. Because look, we're reading all these stories, and here are people just like us who are in just as bad a shape as us, or maybe a whole lot worse, and they're saying, but looky here, I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and here's how I did it. And I truly believe that if I can do that, you can too. And so you see what's happened here with the first reading of the big book. The walls of denial come tumbling down, and hope springs up for those who are hopeless. That's why we read the whole book. That's why we give it to a newcomer and say, read this book. That's what it's telling us right here. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. Following right after that thought, the juxtaposition here is obvious, isn't it? If after having read this book, if you have then decided that you want what we have, you see how that works? And are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. Now let's see how this works in accordance with the directions in the big book. Let's turn our books back to page 96. Page 96 is in chapter 7, and it is detailing for us how we go about working with somebody who's new. On page 95, we were instructed to give this new person who is still willing to learn, give them a big book and have them read it. Page 96, the second full paragraph. The new person has read the book. Suppose now you're making your second visit to a man. Notice that it's the second visit. This is not a year later, by the way. This is not go to 90 meetings in 90 days and prove to me that you really want this, and then maybe I'll be able to help you. It's none of that. This is the second visit. He has read this volume, and he says he's prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. Isn't that what we just read in chapter 5? He decided he wants what we have, and he's willing to go to any lengths to get it. Now he's ready to work the steps. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. Let him know you're available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story, but do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult someone else. In other words, at the second meeting, he indicates to you or she indicates to you that he or she is ready, wants what we have, and is ready to take certain steps. What do? We take them immediately to the steps, don't we? If you're going to be a sponsor, please try not to be a mother or a father. That's not what we are. Spiritual guides. Our job is to help the new person to find God. Remember what the big book says, if he is to find God, the desire must come from within. And when he comes to us and asks us to help him find God, what is it our job is? Not to run his life, not to run her life, to help her find God. We read it at every meeting, the 3 pertinent ideas. Remember, we're alcoholic, can't manage our own lives, no human power to relieve us of our alcoholism. God can and will, if we seek him. What is our job as sponsors? We help the new person seek God. How do we go about doing that? We teach them how to work the steps. Because it is through the working of the steps that we seek God in this program. We don't have any flowing rivers for baptism and robes or any of that stuff. We just have 12 steps. But there's something wonderful there because they always work if we're willing to put the effort in. If you decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it. Now, any length means exactly what it says. Several places in the big book this is repeated. For example, if we're balking at making some amends, the big book says, remember that we agreed in the beginning to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. That's our agreement. That's our commitment. Whatever it takes. Comes first. Has to come first. Has to come first. If it doesn't, we just don't make it. You know, one of the things that happens around here so much of the time is that people get distracted from working the steps, and they're given all kinds of excuses why that's okay. It isn't okay. It cannot be okay. Our first priority has to be to go from a place of rebellion and defiance to a place of surrender, and we do that by working the steps. Then you're ready to take certain steps. The word then is very, very important. What does that mean? It doesn't mean next year, it means then. Then means right then. I'm ready, okay, let's go to the steps. That's what it's saying. Don't we read? Don't we pay attention to what we're reading? At some of these we balked. Why? Because we thought we could find an easier, softer way. But we could not. Now the easier, softer way is bandied about and peddled about and pandered to constantly now these days. It seems like everybody who has a master's degree in psych has figured out a better way to do the steps and has come up with some form or another. I saw the other day a 4-step which was composed of 797 questions. And I remember, I think I told you, one of those questions, would you ever get caught while you're masturbating? And what in the hell is this? I swear to you, I don't know. I said, that's your 4 steps? Oh, yeah. Well, where'd that come from? My sponsor? Well, where'd your sponsor get it? Well, I don't know. Somebody, it looked like it was typed on an old Royal portable standard typewriter. Lots of strikeovers and stuff, but there it was. My friend had been struggling with this for months. Well, it's a 4-step. Wow. Anyway, we're ready to take the steps. Now, that means precisely that we are now ready to follow directions. You want to get the results that are promised? Let's see what you have to do. It's all pretty simple. Page 85. The second full paragraph, which commences 2/3 of the way down the page. Everybody got it? Page 85. Much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from Him who has all knowledge and power. And by the way, if you believe that God has all knowledge and all power, what does that leave for you and me to be egotistical or prideful about? Isn't that where humility comes to us? The moment that we accept and agree that it's true that God has all knowledge and power. That may be all we need to be humble. Now here's the rule. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us, and we've become God conscious. All because we did what? Because we followed directions. Look at the 12th step. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of what? These steps. You see? It's consistent all the way through. There isn't a shadow of a doubt what this book is talking about. And there isn't a shadow of a doubt that millions have followed these directions and have recovered. Why in the world would we go anywhere else to save our lives? But we could not. Back on page 58. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Especially, of course, fearless and thorough in the writing of our 4th step. This is where self-honesty, the absence of self-delusion, really kicks in. But then some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. We can take this as a given for almost everybody in here. Everything we knew when we got here was wrong. We really had to start all over again. What does it mean when we read in chapter 4, lack of power? This was our dilemma. Lack of power of what? What does that mean? It certainly doesn't mean that we were powerless to act, does it? So where does this lack of power comes in? It comes in our heads. We are powerless over our thinking. These old ideas have captured and held us and have destroyed us. We're going to have to be freed from these things. What does it tell us when we get to the promises? Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Now what is it that's going to happen if we do not get rid of these old ideas? The result is nil until we let go absolutely. What does nil mean? Zero, zilch, nada, nothing. We don't get any partial recovery. There's no such thing. We either recover or we don't. Now there are tons of people walking around who claim to have recovery, and actually they're in terrible pain because they're walking around with untreated alcoholism. They have a brave face on it. Some of them have been around a long time, and they are spreading their poison. They really don't want to have to do this work. They don't want to be honest with themselves, but they do want the acclaim of being long-timers. We have to be careful. You know, let me tell you, it's very simple. We don't have to x-ray anybody's brains. We don't have to take their inventory, as they say around here. Don't take my inventory, take your own. You know what all we have to do? When they tell us something that we ought to be doing, we ask them 2 questions. Excuse me. Where's that in the big book? Where's God in that equation? It's not in the book, and God's not there. Just say, thank you very much. Or even better, Do you ever stop to think of all the acronyms we have and all the cutesy pie sayings that go floating around here that don't mean a damn thing? Some of them are kind of fun. The fact is, a lot of that stuff has nothing whatsoever to do with recovery. You ever think about this one, for example? Well, you are only as sick as your secrets. Well, wait a second. Only as sick as your secrets. Let's turn that around. You mean to tell me that if I don't have any secrets, I'll be well? Oh, well, no, that's not what I meant. Well, what did you mean? If I'm only as sick as my secrets, if I get rid of all my secrets, now you just sit down right there, because I got about 5 hours of secrets I'm going to tell you, and when I finish with it, you're going to be sick, and I'm going to be well. Isn't that what the hell we do around here in these meetings with Your Problems Anonymous? If I don't open my mouth, I'll open a bottle. I'm sorry, you're all going to have to suffer along with me. Why don't we just pick up the book, figure out what it says to do, and then do it, and we'll be just fine. All right. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. Alcohol, of course, is not any kind of an animate object. It cannot, has absolutely no power of itself to be cunning, baffling, and powerful, does it? What we're talking about is the alcoholic thinking. Our alcoholic minds are cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. That's the first step. That's the first step. Without help, it is too much for us. We can't do it ourselves. What have we figured out here? We're powerless over alcohol. We're powerless to stop drinking on our own. We can't do it, and if we don't stop drinking, we're going to die. That's why we're here. We want you to show us how we go about stopping drinking. And we can't tell you that. What we can tell you is how to find God. Because when you get God between you and the booze, the desire, the obsession, compulsion to drink is taken away. The problem is solved. It's removed. It doesn't exist anymore. That's what this is all about. The first step tells us that we, without help, this is too much for us because we are powerless. Let's go to the next sentence. We're going to see the second step now. There is one who has all power. That one is God. There is one who has all power. That one is God. You want to know if that's the second step? Sure. Let's take a look on page 53, please. Page 53, the second full paragraph, right in the middle of the page. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else He is nothing. God either is or He isn't. What was our choice to be? See? That's the test of the second step. Go back to page 59 again. Because we have come to believe, the second step, we have come to believe that there is one who has all power, and that one is God. God exists. God is all powerful. That we have come to believe. And we understand and accept as a fact that the all-powerful God who in fact exists certainly has the power to restore us to sanity. And that's the belief of the second step. May you find Him now. Half measures availed us nothing, nada, zilch. We get absolutely no half recovery. There is no such thing. We either recover or we don't. We either find God and surrender to God or we don't. Then the question is, do I stay in a state of surrender or I fall back upon self and playing God again? If I do that, I drink again. So long as I stay close to God and perform His work well, I stay sober. He gives me everything I need. What more do we need to know? Half measures avail us nothing. Half measures are endemic around the rooms these days. New Age AA pronounces nothing but half measures, because it wants us to feel good all the time. This is not about feel good. This is not about being entertained. This is about fitting ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. That's why we're here. And once we've done so, to follow His directions and His will, which is for us to carry this message to others, to practice these principles in all of our affairs. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with wanting us to feel good. You hear all the time, if I'm comfortable, I know I'm okay. How in the world we get so far off base? It is true that our heritage is that we be happy, joyous, and free. How does that come about? That's God's will for us, and we earn it. We get to have happiness, joyousness, and freedom when we carefully follow directions and continue to do so on a disciplined and consistent basis. Then happiness, joyousness, and freedom is ours, and we get to have a life beyond anything we could ever imagine for ourselves. And it sure as hell isn't something our sponsor can give us. It's not something which can be artificially induced in us by making us feel better today. I don't want her to feel badly. That's why I told her my whole story, and to make sure that she realized I was 10 times worse than she could ever have been. So naturally she's going to feel better. Let's talk about all your good stuff now. No. Good stuff didn't hurt us. There just wasn't enough of it. We stood at the turning point. We asked His protection and care with complete abandon. That is the third step. We ask His protection and care with complete abandon. What don't we understand about complete? We're giving up entirely. We are evidencing our entire willingness and our desire to give up and completely abandon to God. And when we get a little later to the third step, we'll see how that works. Now we begin to see just how powerful this chapter 5 is and why it's read at most meetings, and why is it then universally ignored while we think about football scores or our date for Saturday night. Why is it that we daydream and pay no attention to somebody who's struggling to read this for us? Why is it that we don't say, wait a second, this is the real stuff. This is where it all is. I need to be reminded of these things every day. If you're a sponsor, you teach your sponsees to pay attention to this, to listen to it, learn to listen to this, read along with this. Should have their books at every meeting. But this is the way it really, really, really works. We have to immerse ourselves in this book at all times. If we don't, we're going to forget what's in here. Our minds just aren't going to retain all these things. That's why repetition in AA is so important. Over and over and over and over and over again, we hear the same things. And one day, the light dawns. You say, wow, I didn't even know that was there. Well, you hadn't been listening, maybe. But then this is natural. This book is so dense. It is the most dense reading you will ever pick up in your entire life. Every word, every phrase, every sentence is critical and important. There are sentences in this book that have 4, count them, 4 profound statements in one sentence. And if we're not careful, we go flying right by it as if there wasn't anything there. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal housekeeping cleaning, which many of us have never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, and that means the decision of the third step, to turn our life and our will over to the care of God. Though our decision was a crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. The 2 words, at once, mean exactly what they say. We've done our third step, we immediately commence our 4th step, at once. Our liquor was but a symptom Please understand what this is saying. Alcohol and the ingestion of alcohol is a symptom of the disease of alcoholism. And alcoholism in its most basic form is a form of spiritual bankruptcy. So we're not talking about alcohol as being a cause, we're talking about it as being a symptom. Real important to understand this, the difference. That's why the big book does not say stop drinking. That would be foolish. Tell somebody you can't stop, they got to stop. It tells us to find a power greater than ourselves which will solve our problem. Our liquor was but a symptom. Now here's the rule. We had to get down to causes and conditions. And to do that, then we're going to take inventory. Let's go to the second paragraph on page 64. Talking about, the paragraph before talks about taking inventory in a business. Now it says we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. That's a very, very important sentence. Look what it's telling us. That the root of our problems is self, selfishness and self-centeredness. On page 62, 2 pages back, it tells us precisely that. That the root of our trouble is selfishness, self-centeredness, and we can't get rid of self on our own. It also tells us that decisions based on self have put us in a position to be harmed. And so as we look at our 4-step inventory, keep in mind that our primary search here is for self and selfishness, self-centeredness, self-centered fear, self-delusion, self-will, run riot. Okay? That resentment is the #1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Why? Because deep resentments block us, absolutely block us from God. When we're walking around full of anger and rage and resentment and thoughts of revenge, we've taken that day and we've flushed it down the toilet. We've destroyed the day. Going on, from it stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. We can characterize that as spiritual bankruptcy. Now here's a little rule which sounds preposterous, and yet it's the absolute truth. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And when you've been around here for a while, and some of you have, you've seen such miracles of physical and mental recovery that many times it's beyond the power of the doctors and psychiatrists to explain it. They just don't know how that possibly could have happened. So therefore, in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. This means now that our inventory is going to be a written one. Everything that we're going to do on the 4-step is in writing. We do not take inventory in our heads. Think about it. If you owned a shoe store, would you go in the back room and try to inventory your stock and trade in your head? And obviously not. If you start taking inventory about yourself in your head, you're going to find you're out there dancing with a clown before you realize it. And whatever it is you were supposed to be looking at in your head goes right by the boards. We got to get it out of our head and down on paper. And that's for the 4-step and the 10-step and the 11-step. There's a little ditty I made up and I love it. It goes very simply like this. The more you write, the better you feel. The more you write, the better you feel. You can expand on that all you want. Write, write, write. Anytime you get jammed up, write it down. And as we go through our 4-step, we learn how to do that. So, in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We ask ourselves why we were angry. Let's talk about that. Institutions, IRS, police, church, college, IBM, the Elks, the Masons, and the Daughters of the American Revolution. Whatever it is, whatever institution you may have come in contact with that made you angry. Principles will be those things which you were taught, which you believed were basic to living your life, and it turned out that they were wrong and they led you astray, and you got in difficulty trying to follow other people's ideas of how you should live your life. Primarily, these principles will be based upon some kind of fear that you must do this or else, that if you don't do this you will be in deep trouble, and we'll see to it that the prosecutors know all about you. Now, they may be heavenly prosecutors or they may be earthly prosecutors, but nevertheless you're going to be in deep trouble if you don't follow these principles that we over here have laid down for you, and all of us were subjected to much of that. And then when we find that that stuff doesn't work, we can sometimes become very, very angry about it. In most cases, we ask ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened, so we were sore, we were burned up. Okay. Those all relate in one way or another to our natural God-given instincts, which means that when our instincts are attacked by other people, it causes us to be fearful. It causes us anxiety. It is a threat almost always will result in fear. And fear warps and perverts our natural instincts. So if I am told that I am no damn good from the time I'm a little kid, if I'm told that I am ugly, that I'm dumb, that I'm never going to make anything of myself, and I'm told that often enough, pretty soon I come to believe it. I end up with zero self-esteem. And when our security is threatened in any way, now that includes, of course, our financial security, we get very angry, we get fearful, we get anxious. When our personal relationships are threatened, our personal relationships refer particularly to our instinct to be in the society of our fellows, to be accepted within our society, to be thought kindly of, to be admired, but mostly and most importantly to be accepted and not shunned and not pushed away and not rejected. Just think of the things that you've done to avoid rejection by your peers, the things that we do to somehow or another try to fit in. And you hear around the rooms that little phrase, I don't know where it came from, but whatever it is, we all seem to pretty much agree, that I never felt a part of. Well, not feeling a part of means that I have felt rejected. We need to say, I felt rejected, because that's exactly what's happened to us. And that's very painful. And of course, the interference with our sex relations, again, that's an interference with a natural instinct, the instinct for sex, which is very powerful. And if you want to test its power, just think back. How many times did you have to convince yourself to get sexually aroused when you had the opportunity? It just happens, doesn't it? Because it's instinctual, and it operates below the level of conscious thought. So when we see that, we begin to understand what these defects of character really are. They are these natural instincts which have been warped and perverted and twisted out of shape by fear. So the first thing we're going to do then is we're going to be looking at our resentments. Now, there are 4 parts to the 4th step. 4 parts. The first part is our resentment list. The second part is the list of our own wrongs and the harm we've done others. The third part is our fears list. And the fourth part is our sex inventory. First, resentments. Second, our wrongs. Third, our fears. Fourth, our sex inventory. Now, each of these four parts looks at a particular defect or several defects. Obviously, the first part, which is resentments, looks at resentments and fear. The second part looks at selfishness, dishonesty, and fear. The third part looks at fear, and the fourth part looks at selfishness and dishonesty. Okay? So that each of these four parts has very specific defects which it addresses. There are a couple of other things that come out of a proper fourth step. Let's examine what they are. These 5 things will result from doing a proper fourth step. First, we will lose our resentments. They will be gone. The resentments we carried in here with us will be gone, because in our fourth step and our fifth step we have the complete spiritual answer to resentments. We're going to pray for the people who harmed us, and we're going to ask God to make us willing to forgive. And by the time we finish our fourth step, the resentments will be gone. Second, we're going to commence to lose our fears. In our fourth step, our fears begin to fall from us. We begin to lose our fears. Third, we're going to have an ideal for our future sex life. That is, we're going to have an ideal for how we wish to conduct ourselves in our relationships. And by extension, that goes not only to our sex relations, but to our relationships with all people. Fourth, we're going to have a list of all the people we've harmed. You may not realize it, but within the fourth step, we complete our 8-step list, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 people that the fourth step doesn't dig out for us. But our basic 8-step list is done in the fourth step. Not only is the 8-step list done, but we have become willing and ready to make amends in our fourth step. So the basic aspects of the 8th step are already done in the fourth step. And number 5, we're going to have a list of our defects of character. We're going to have especially the 4 cardinal defects: dishonesty, selfishness, resentment, and fear. They're going to all show up like a big neon signs in stereophonic, widescreen, Technicolor, and Dolby. There'll be no doubt that they're right there in front of us. And so we're going to have that list of our defects, which we're going to carry with us into our 5th step. And it is in our 5th step that we're going to be admitting these defects and talking about the failures in our lives which led to these defects. They're killers because they block us from God. And without God in our lives, we don't make it. Let's always remember, when you're working with your sponsees, keep going back to basics with them so that they understand what in the heck we're doing here. Many resentments your sponsees will have carried with them all of their lives. Some of these resentments are so well hidden that they're barely recognizable. Many times the resentments only surface as a matter of deja vu, sometimes only in sporadic moments. Maybe there will be years between them surfacing. I like to think of resentments as a whole gang of termites which are chewing away at the foundations of my house. And they're down there buried in the wood, the subconscious. And I don't even know they're there until the floors start to collapse. Now, termites being the way they are, if we don't get them all out, they're going to go find themselves another queen and start over again. So we can very easily end up having another gang of termites very quickly. It's the same thing. If you were to go to your physician who is about to operate on you for cancer of the stomach and say to him, "It's okay, doc, I'd like for you, it doesn't matter if you leave a little bit in there," he'd look at you like you were crazy. Well, we can no more leave resentments than we can leave cancer, because resentments are cancerous. They eat us alive. This means then that we're going to have to find a way to identify all of those resentments which even appear to have disappeared. You see, your sponsee will most likely tell you, "I don't resent anybody. I don't have any resentments. I know that all of these things that people did to me were my own fault. I mean, they told me down at the treatment center that my mother did the best she could. But nevertheless, look at what you did to her. And no wonder she treated you that way. Therefore, you must not resent her." Oh, okay. Well, then I guess I don't resent her. Balderdash. We don't wish away resentments. They don't get talked out of resentments. We don't get rationalized out of resentments. We can hide them. We can be self-delusionary about them. We can rationalize them, we can excuse them, we can do everything we want to do to them. But it's just like a preposition. Resentments are like anything a rabbit can do to a hill, and you can't figure out every way that rabbit has to get into that hill. I don't care how smart a psychiatrist you got. And so we're going to have to go the other way. We're going to have to dig them out. We're going to find out what they are and why we have them. That why is so important, because it's always going to boil down to what they did to us or around us, which caused us to be fearful, to be angry, and thus to develop a resentment. Now, to do that, we need to review our entire lives. We cannot depend upon our memories in the sense of, whom do you resent right now? Well, let's see. Joe and Charlie and Tom and Dick and Harry and Alice and a couple of other women I can't remember the names of. Also the Catholic Church, the cops, the IRS, and the Marine Corps. That's all you resent? Yeah, that's it. I don't have any other resentments. What about Mama? What about Daddy? What about Uncle Tom? What about Grandpa and Grandma? What about aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, nieces, nephews, teachers, employers, girlfriends, boyfriends, wives, children, judges, jailers? What about the insurance man? What about your stockbroker? Tell me that you don't have resentments toward any of them. Well, maybe, but, well, let's find out. The way we're going to find out, we're going to go back and we're going to list all the people who have been important in our lives, all the way back as far as we can remember, starting with our families. Now, you see why we're going to do this for two reasons. First of all, by doing that, we're not going to miss anybody. And secondly, because we're just starting our four-step, and this is a good technique to remember with your sponsees, this will help them to jog their memory, because there's a process of association that goes on here. And the more they write down about people in their lives, the more people will pop into their memory. Not only that, but now events and circumstances begin to pop in. All sorts of things begin to come into memory that were not there, or were hidden. And so we really begin the process of memory rehabilitation by doing this. Once we have the names of everybody down, obviously, well, it would be a rare case where we have resentment toward everybody on that list. So we're going to find out what they did to us. To do that, we have to ask ourselves certain questions about every person on that list. We ask ourselves, did this person anger me at some time in the past? Did this person harm me in any way? Did this person wrong me? And here's a good one. Did this person threaten me in some way? And then there's a fifth question that we use because it will ferret out the resentments that we don't want to remember, we don't want to own up to. There's a very interesting twist of mind that goes along here, and as a sponsor you should know that this will kick in with a lot of your people. They have been hurt and hurt badly and have developed anger and resentment toward people upon whom they depended. This would be especially, for example, parents. Now, it's very, very difficult on the one hand to recognize the faults and the harm that's been done by a parent upon whom we depend. And we don't, and it's even worse to try to have to admit it to somebody. Because we're saying, well, why in the world did I permit this to happen? Well, you did, you had to, you were dependent upon that person. We cannot, it's very difficult for us to think badly about someone upon whom we depend. How many times are you going to be talking to somebody who's been beaten around the head and shoulders by a spouse or significant other, will come right back and say, but I love him. Well, hoo-ha. There are things that are going on here that we got to recognize. And love is not enough. I love my parents. Yes. What did your dad do to you that caused you to be angry, if anything? Well, let's see, he beat me, he didn't take care of me, he didn't play ball with me, he didn't bring home enough money for us to eat, he told me I was stupid and ugly. Oh. And so those things that he did to you, what we're going to do now, because you don't want to recognize the resentment, what we're going to do is we're going to go over here on our resentment list, going to write down the things he did to you. And out of that writing will come the realization on your part that yes, indeed, there's a deep-seated resentment there. Now, another thing you want to be sure you emphasize with your sponsees, this four-step resentment list is not intended as an indictment of anybody. We're not indicting them, we're not making them bad people. All we're looking for is what did they do that caused us harm and fear and resentment. And so when we find somebody who's not willing to recognize the harm that was done, the fifth question we ask is, was this person unfair to me? Now you see, unfairness is not a pejorative, it's not an indictment. It doesn't mean bad, it just means unfair. And I've had sponsees who wouldn't answer yes to any harm or wrong or threat or anger, but they would answer yes all the way down the line to unfair. Well, now, think about it for a second. When somebody treats you unfairly, isn't it usual in your experience that this would anger you in a way? That would discomfort you at least in some way. So when we write about what was unfair, then we find out that it was truly harmful. We just didn't want to admit it. We did not want to say that anybody was wrong or bad. Somebody's gotten to us ahead of time and told us we can't do that. And we've accepted that as being true. So now by this time we know exactly what we're going to write about. Now this brings us down to something else, and I want you to remember this, burn it into your forehead. There is no fourth column or fifth column in the resentment list, in spite of the fact that there are all these forms out there floating around from people who pretend that they have taken these directly from the big book, but they have not. They've added their own predilections, their own view of how it ought to be. They have failed to recognize one of the most important facts about this resentment list. It is designed specifically for us to uncover the wrongs that others have done us. These steps, these parts of the four-step require a narrative description. Let's look at this on page 67. We resolutely looked at our own mistakes. Now there are 4 questions here. They're headed up by the word where. It doesn't say, were they? Or did I? Or was I? It says, where had I been selfish? Where had I been dishonest? Where had I been self-seeking? Where had I been frightened? The word where means that we must have a narrative description of where we did this, what we did. What did we do that was selfish? What did we do that was dishonest? What did we do that was self-seeking? What did we do that was frightened? So here's what we do. We go over here. The first person on our resentment list way over here is Dad. Now we're going to move Dad over here. Now we've already gotten rid of our resentments of Dad. They're gone because we prayed for him and we asked God to make us willing to forgive what he did to us. We don't hate him anymore. Now it's time when we can look at Dad. What did I do? All right, with respect to Dad, in my relationship with him, where had I been selfish? I need to write down my selfishness and the instances of selfishness. I need to write down my actions and my motivations and my attitudes. When we finish that, with respect to Dad, my relationship with Dad, where had I been dishonest? We finish that. Where had I been self-seeking? And where had I been frightened? Now we go down a little bit further. In my relationship with my dad, where was I to blame? We got 5 questions we're going to answer about each person on that resentment list, separate and apart from the resentment list. Got it? Now what have we got? We have identified our resentments in our first list. Now we are identifying dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. This means that by the time we finish the second part of the 4-step, we're well along the way to discovering the 4 cardinal defects: selfishness, resentment, dishonesty, and fear. Okay? Now then, we have also done something else. In examining what we've done, which has been harmful to others, we have begun to compile our 8-step list. You see, because we've been identifying the things we did which we need to make amends for. And we will also have begun to be willing to set these matters straight. Look at the bottom, look at page 67 again. The last sentence in that second full paragraph: we admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. That's the 8th step, guys. We've identified the people we've harmed and we've become willing to make amends. You see how this works? This is all happening at one time here in the 4th step. You can begin to see just how critical this 4th step is to be done right. Now the third part of the 4th step is our fears list. We're going to write down our fears. And we're going to write down what caused them. What's the threat? Write down our fears and write down what causes them. What is the threat? Fear is one of the names for the devil, in my opinion, that's just my opinion, if there is a devil. I'm not sure about that, but if there is, fear's got to be one of his names, maybe his main name. Maybe that's what Satan means in some languages, fear. I don't know about that either. But all I can tell you is that fear is our enemy. And it very, very well may be that fear is our only enemy. Remember Franklin Delano Roosevelt, beginning of the Second World War, said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And the big book says that fear is an evil and corroding thread, that the fabric of our existence is shot through with it. So what we're going to do in this third part, we're going to write down our fears and write down what we believe caused them. What was the threat? There are some standard, if you want to call it that, or typical fears that almost all of us have when we come in. A fear of not getting what we want or need, a fear of losing what we have, a fear of rejection, a fear of failure, a fear of drinking or drugging again, a fear of God's vengeance, a fear of being found out for who and what we are, fear of economic insecurity, fear of death, fear of pain, injury, suffering, sickness. You can add more to them, but almost every, oh, and for women especially, fear of getting old, fat, and ugly. The gals I sponsor always look at me kind of screwy when I mention that as a possibility. These are real fears, and these fears are phantoms. We have to understand. Look, there are a couple of references. If you have the 24-hour day book, why don't you look at two meditations, April 9th and December 20th. They both deal with fear. And the April 9th tells us that fear is a phantom, which means that it's a product of our minds we manufacture. We're not talking about the fear engendered by a .357 Magnum held cocked with the safety off and a madman on the other end of that weapon pointed right at your head, or a bus about to crush the life out of you. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something that hasn't happened yet, may not, probably won't happen, but we're afraid of it anyway. And we manufacture these fears, and they're phantoms, and they have no reality because they're always dealing with something that hasn't happened yet, and which is not imminent in the sense of imminent peril to life and limb. And since they are phantoms and products of our mind, they're a form of insanity. You can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind, so we don't even try. If you've identified that, that's fine. We're going to answer these questions. Let's say that on my list is Hildegard. We've got to be politically correct here. I've got to make sure that I don't mention the name of anybody who might possibly be a real person around here. Hildegard. In my relationship with Hildegard, where had I been selfish? Where had I been dishonest? Where had I been inconsiderate? Notice again, this requires a narrative description of my dishonesty, selfishness, and inconsideration.